All right, today we are diving into a story that's part digital heist, part animation history lesson. We're talking about the Nickelodeon Gigaleak, a massive data breach that basically ripped open the vault and spilled the secret history of some of the most iconic cartoons ever made.
I mean, just think about it for a second. What if the original scripts, those early, kind of weird-looking character sketches, and all the deleted scenes from the shows you grew up with, what if they all just appeared online one day? Well, for Nickelodeon, this wasn't just a what if. This actually happened.
Okay, so let's set the scene. Our story doesn't start in some fancy animation studio. Nope, it begins where a lot of internet chaos begins, on the wilder edges of the web, where a single, unassuming file started a huge chain reaction.
So on June 29th, 2023, this file, just called nick.7z, pops up on 4chan. And, it could have just vanished into the noise, but then an ex-user, Ghosty Tongue, posted about it, and all of a sudden this obscure file was front and center in the public spotlight.
And we're not talking about some small text file here. This thing was 6.7 gigabytes. That is a ton of data. We're talking thousands upon thousands of documents, images, and videos. It was basically a digital treasure chest, and someone had just blown the lock clean off. So what exactly are we looking at here? Well, this wasn't some random accident. It was a targeted data breach. The hackers went straight for the Nickelodeon animation department and got unauthorized access to their core production files.
Okay, so the file's out in the wild, and immediately everybody had the same question. What is actually in it? And the answer, well, it was more shocking than pretty much anyone could have guessed.
This whole event was so big that it got a nickname almost instantly, the Gigaleak. And if that sounds familiar, it's because it's the same term used for that enormous Nintendo breach a while back. It's a name that tells you this wasn't just a small mistake. This was a leak on a totally different level with huge cultural importance.
For fans, the contents were an absolute dream, but for the studio, a complete nightmare. We're talking about everything: scripts, storyboards, production schedules, original character designs, you name it. And this wasn't just old stuff from classics like SpongeBob or Rugrats. No, it also had incredibly sensitive files from shows that were currently in production, and even some that hadn't been announced yet.
So, as you can imagine, the internet just went into a total frenzy. Fan communities, especially places like Reddit's Lost Media Group, were buzzing. For them, this was like finding a map to buried treasure. They thought this could be the key to finding things they'd only ever heard rumors about, like lost pilots or the original, uncensored cuts of old episodes.
But here's where the story takes a turn. That huge public file drop, that wasn't really the beginning. It was just the moment the rest of us noticed. Turns out, stuff had been quietly trickling out for months before that. Things like assets from the Casa Grande's movie and a giant collection of SpongeBob model sheets.
And that quiet, simmering leak? It leads us to the most shocking part of this entire story. The real secret wasn't just what was leaked. It was about how long the door to the vault had been left wide open. Just look at this timeline. It's staggering. So we all found out in June 2023. But Nickelodeon had actually patched the hole 5 months earlier, in January. But here's the real kicker: that unauthorized access, it started way back in 2020. For 3 years. The system was compromised for 3 years, and nobody on the outside had a clue.
So, with a 3-year-old secret suddenly out in the open for the whole world to see, how did Nickelodeon handle the fallout?
Well, their public response created a bit of a disconnect. On one hand, their official statement said the leak involved some decades-old files, trying to make it sound like old news. But the reality, which everyone could see, was that the leak was packed with very current and unreleased project files.
So, the company's damage control plan rolled out in 3 basic steps. First, they had to acknowledge the breach happened. Second, they tried to downplay it, really stressing that no personal data from users or employees was taken. And third, they went on the legal attack, sending out a wave of DMCA takedown notices to try and get the files wiped from the internet.
So, after all the drama, the takedown notices, the official statements, what are we left with? What's the real, lasting impact of the Nickelodeon Gigaleak? Honestly, this whole thing was a massive wake-up call. It showed just how vulnerable these huge corporate digital archives can be. It also created this fascinating clash between the pure excitement of fans and the very real issue of intellectual property theft. And because we still don't know the full scope of what was taken, it brings up some really tough ethical questions about whether it's okay to share lost media when it was found illegally.
And that brings us to the one big question that's still hanging in the air. That Nick.7z file was enormous, yeah. But there's speculation it was just a curated sample, a small piece of everything the hackers took. After 3 years of access, it really makes you wonder, what else is still out there?